Hello and welcome to Simblified, the only show entirely immune of the Great Resignation. Here it's more the other way around, where IVM is desperately seeking for us to quit for the last 6 years. But here we are, resilient as ever. We are like that bad yeast infection that never leaves. So
Wow.
yeah, but just as entertaining. And yes, so here we are, all four of us together again. Wow. Big phenomenon.
I just want to say yeast or just simplified is the best.
Hey man, I can count on opening with a dirty roughshod opening and count on Tony.
Yeast reminds me of this joke. So there's this famous rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which goes, a jug of wine, a loaf of bread, and thou beside me in the wilderness. That's how it goes. And Johnny Carson says, you know what is common among all of these? The guest asks, what? Yeast.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Anyway,
So,
Tony usually starts these things with a pun. Today he started with a bun.
bun. Truly.
We're all rising to the occasion.
Right. Wow. I mean, we should totally have a bakery-led episode at this point, but we are going to pivot back to our...
It's the only kind of dough we'll make of the show. So
Yes. Oh man. Okay.
Quickly. I can see Tony's opening Instamart right now.
Yeah.
The bakery section.
Before the audience starts leavening.
Yeah.
Oh,
they think that we are a bunch of loafers.
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so moving quickly from the bakery themed opening that we have had, we will go back to the point that we an episode that we have done previously, and this episode serves as an update to that. This is the phenomenon that we had discussed previously, which was called the Great Resignation. So it's the phenomenon which began somewhere in the middle of the pandemic or towards the mid of the pandemic, when it began, was around the last year sometime, where people were leaving their organizations in droves. It was a phenomenon that was first observed in the US, but it's a phenomenon that's kind of taken over the world in some way. And now, Tony, what was the statistic you just sent me before? I didn't add that to my list of statistics. Do you have that at your fingertips by any chance?
I can just pull up my screen.
Yeah. I mean, this is simplified. Our listeners have the patience to wait for our poor
2021 quit rates surpassed 38 million.
2021 quit rate surpassed
around the world,
38 million.
Yeah. Around the world.
Globally.
Around the
So yeah, I mean...
I didn't download the report.
Which also could be a tagline for Simplified. But so I mean, which was at the time when we did the recording was still just an emerging phenomenon. It's clearly something established that has taken over. And what has happened in the time intervening and what we will discuss today is several sub-phenomena that have kind of sprung up under what the overarching view of the Great Resignation. And one particular phenomenon which we will be discussing is something called quiet quitting, which is an offshoot of the Great Resignation, but not quite. There is no resignation involved over here. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And so this is something that we will be talking about today. And let's start with what is this quiet quitting. In fact, as all things that begin in this day and age, this particular quiet quitting trend came to light on
Instagram? What?
On TikTok.
You were close. I was thinking of a specific date.
Tony said Instagram.
Yeah.
So in fact, how this trend kind of came to light was a whole bunch of employees actually like putting up videos and reels of like them literally like showing that, okay, this is my clock is here. It's going to become 5 o'clock and this is where I'm going to switch off my phone and like entirely get offline and like go away from my, like not be accessible to anybody at work. People like leaving their laptops at work.
Flintstone.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty much. Exactly. Like waiting for that last minute. And so, I mean, people made hilarious memes of it, but it actually has sparked like this larger conversation of how work is being approached to right now. So while we saw a huge number of people, like the spike of the Great Resignation happened last year and it continues into this year as well, what we are also seeing is a whole bunch of workers, especially the younger workers, who are kind of like, they are literally, the symptoms of this thing, quiet quitting is, I will literally stick to what my responsibilities are to the T and not go an inch beyond that. Right? So if my job requires me to stay officially till 5 p.m., 5:01 is I am dead to this office. Right? There is no initiative that I will be taking. If I am required to answer a particular email or write a particular line of code, which my manager is telling me to do, I will write exactly that. And there is no level of creativity or initiative or any kind of additional stuff that I will put beyond it. Right? There are various dimensions of quiet quitting, some of which are there, a lot of which also come from the aspect of, there are that I am no longer going to like evangelize my company in any which way, especially for smaller startups, where I'm going to actively, in fact, evangelize the opposite of it. I'm actually going to discourage other people from joining this place. I am actually going to actively sabotage the efforts of projects that are going by my inaction. Right? It is not active sabotage, it's inaction. Through my inaction, I will left several things so that enough time lapses over there. And
masterly inaction.
I somehow feel there's a Man United joke in there somewhere, but I don't know enough about football to make it.
It's probably a Man United joke in most things.
Yeah. And
there was this poem we had in school, which went something like this. Life is like the ripples caused by a pebble cast in a slow, silent stream, ever widening, disappearing like childhood's green dreams. Quiet quitting is like disappearing like childhood's green dreams. I was inexorably
coming up with our own profundities now.
Yeah, the problem is, Naren, when you start off on things like this, we expect like a joke or something at the end of it. So when it becomes profound like this, we are like, we're at loss. We don't know.
Without warning, we don't quite know. So I used to have this bad habit in the past. So I had a very silent car at one point of time. My dad used to have a car called the Matties, which was ultra silent, a Daewoo car. Yeah.
Daewoo.
So I had a very noisy, all cars were pretty noisy. And this thing was remarkably quiet. So the cheap thrills were, you go very close to a pedestrian and then you honk and then the guy jumps. And that's like, so I don't know what the connection was.
That's why they stopped making that.
Without warning.
What?
Wow, okay. We are truly indulging.
Is quiet quitting an age-based phenomenon, or is it
great question,
TikTok,
Tony.
So that means under 23.
So there are some numbers that have come up on this. Like, one is the State of the Global Workplace report that actually says that only 21% of employees are actively engaged with their work. And a Gallup report, which actually looked at the other end of the spectrum, which is disengaged workers, it found that proportion of actively disengaged workers was 18%. And when they actually looked at that number for workers under 35, that actively disengaged number actually became 24%. So if you were to like do some kind of data number analysis, there's like roughly 21% of employees who are actively engaged and 24% employees who are actively disengaged.
Wow, so that's a good poll on workers who are galloping. And I just wanted to make that joke before Tony did. Thanks.
Oh my God.
It's like, and I saw you reach also in the front. You're taking like, you're keeping score or what? Like one line here, then you'll do it. After four, you'll put one cross on it.
So, this quiet quitting is quite interesting, right? Basically, they said it's basically like you'll do only what you're told and nothing more. They did tell us that robots will take over our job. Turns out it's like human robots.
So it was
we turned into robots first.
Yeah.
If you can't beat them, join them types.
Yeah, there was this quote, like we went looking for the enemy and it was us, or something like that.
But also a tagline for Simblified, which we self-sabotage.
But it's fair enough, yeah. Like many of the reasons that you spoke about in the last episode, I remember, it's not like employers are doing themselves any, like, you can't blame employees for having this kind of mindset. They're not exactly making things conducive for people to be engaged. A lot of them, I'd like to think.
So that's actually a great point, because it's actually in a macro sense, and this is the argument, the philosophical argument of this entire phenomenon that's coming, is that from the younger generation is very actively rejecting the hustle culture that was established by a generation before them, right? The entire premise of the hustle culture is for them fallacious, and actually it is a premise that is used to kind of exploit people, right? That this is how the work culture is. Everyone is, and all the packaging that comes with the hustle culture stuff, right? You talk about divine discontent, you talk about like we are going to have we are nothing but the best, and all those axioms that were kind of thrown around. There is an active rejection of that, because people are like, okay, for the younger people, there is a clear thing about there needs to be a fair value exchange between an employer and an employee. And you can throw all the axioms and all the motivation out there, and I'm not affected by that. I need a fair value exchange. And when I'm not receiving that, I am going to either A, resign, or B, in some cases worse for the organization, quiet quit. Right. And so that's one aspect of it. So this is where...
but fundamentally, there's the age-old two-factor theory of motivation, right? Which says that there are hygiene needs and then there are motivators. And something like a salary at the end of the day is hygiene, right? Which means that even if tech salaries are doubling or tripling, what people really need to be actively engaged with their work is meaning, which is like extremely difficult to drive as it is. But imagine a scenario where your workforce is not even coming to a common place, right? I'll take a different analogy to say, growing up, why did we have so many people who were either supporting Man United or Liverpool or Arsenal? Right? It's basically that A, they were winning, obviously, but also B, you had a community around it. And like the more time you spend with that community, the more you bought into that whole thing. Right? But when it's over like Zoom call or Teams, it's obviously very transactional, and you don't have those moments where you actually sort of get together and acquire that meaning. Right? So I wouldn't entirely blame organizations. It is sort of like the perfect storm to say when you are in your early 20s, you think like, everything is bullshit. Like people running the world have no clue, which is true to a certain extent. And also you think that your life is going to be very different from what your 35-year-old boss's life is. Right?
But I would give a small counterpoint over here is that, yes, while there is, I won't discount what you're saying, that there is an element of disconnection that is causing it. But I think because this is a real trend, the rates of resignation are something that have not been previously seen before, right? This is enough to cause a new trend, that this is not something that's a cyclical thing in any which way. This is a new cycle beginning in some ways, right? Or a new trend that's opening up in some ways. And I feel there is a distinct and real shift as far as how the perception of what a job is supposed to entail for you, right? Like whether there is through this phenomenon, the younger generation is like pretty like communicating that the current status quo of how work is not acceptable for them to kind of take on. Right. And it's not like we're just talking about a bunch of kids who don't have a sense of responsibility and are lazy and whatever those other things. Right. We're talking about like people who have been working for 7, 10, 12 years, people who have worked in that hustle culture, who have excelled in that hustle culture, who have held like massive positions in that place, who have come to that realization. And yes, the biggest catalyst for this event has to be the pandemic and what all the pandemic entailed. So factors like remote workplaces where you're not having that human connection, therefore feeling disengaged from the workplace, plus the other aspects of what the pandemic has also entailed. Like it's really, in some cases, while it's kind of on some level made you more aware of work-life balance, while effectively killing a lot of it, right? And that disjunct has caused a lot of issues as well.
Yeah, it's like a lot of things just coming together, right? Exactly. Like you said, pandemic, remote work, this thing, that thing, you have a community of people. I mean, it's more a thing now than ever before to quit. But also, I think this, the younger generation, I think that's also got the sense of individualism and, like my sense of identity is not going to be defined by my work. Precisely. Right? Like this is the standard thing is when somebody asks you, what do you do, is to answer with work. And slowly that kind of culture is kind of seeping away. Like you want to be known for more than being an account manager at an ad agency or whatever it is, especially if you're an account manager.
And that's a great point, because what was the first line of your identity has now become maybe the third or the fourth line of your identity for a lot of people. And
or at least they want it to be that way.
They want it to be there. Yeah.
So that's the other thing, right? So when you are switching off at 5 p.m., it means that you're switching on a lot of other identities or things that you want to do. Precisely. So I refuse to believe that the younger generation is necessarily lazy and they don't want to work. It's just that they've found something that's more meaningful to them and stuff like that. Now, how that plays out in the medium or long term is for time to tell. But I guess it's just a combination of all these factors kind of coming together.
Yeah, I don't think like anyone saying they're lazy. I'm just saying that it's
a lot of
basically
people are,
got
by
to
the way.
do-
A lot of people
A lot
are
of
saying
people
that
are,
they
obviously,
lazy.
yeah.
I don't think like statistically the number of lazy people has gone up in like 5
Sure.
years or one generation or something like that. Right? It's more that you are sort of in a space where no one can breathe down your neck all the time. Thank God for that. But also then like a lot of your responsibility becomes individual, right? Like, do I put my hand up and, say something is broken and I will try to fix it, or at least flag it, or just say, these are the tasks that have been allotted to me and I'll do them. Right? So it's a different kind of thing.
Yeah. By the way, this is totally a total aside from what he said, but when you were talking about this Gen Z millennial, I mean, those are the overture over here anyway, right? There's a usual joke that millennials sit and eat avocado toast, right? So this is some news report that came out recently that some restaurants or some food chains are suffering losses because not enough avocados are being sold. So somebody retweeted that saying, can you guys just make up your mind? Do you want us to eat avocados or not?
No, that might be an offshoot of the Great Resignation, that a lot of the millennials quit their jobs and now can't afford avocados.
That brings me to the that point is either it's very, very easy to get alternative jobs, or people are okay with not having a job at all. So which of the two do you think is more likely?
So that's where I think what's happened, and that's where some data on that as well, is that what the Great Resignation began with was fundamentally a bunch of people saying that, you know what, my experience currently in my job is so terrible that I'm willing to kind of take the leap out of my job. I will take the risk and take the leap out of my job. And enough number of people did that at the same time, saying that I will take the leap out of my job without a safety net. What that did was, obviously, as the people started leaving in droves, the job market got severely impacted. And that kind of compelled a lot of employers, and this is not uniform across, and this is not just as simplistic as that, but a lot of employers then realized that, in this particular context, we are losing a lot of good trained talent, and we are going to have to pay above the odds for attracting talent of the same caliber and the same mindset also, who are burnt out, who are frustrated in that way. Right. So that has led to like employers starting rolling out like better policies, better attractive options, more money, all of that stuff. And at least till the end of last year, it was very much an employees market. Right. That has changed a little bit over this year. There are certain other factors like the war and the recession and all that stuff, which has kind of shrunk the job market in a little bit. But that trend continues to remain strong because also the thing is, what happens is that what a job would do for a lot of people was that it would kind of lock them in. And this is not part of any data, but this is kind of coming from my I was part of the trend that actually quit my job over the last year. Once you break the cycle of having a job, I continuously held a job for about 10 years before I quit my job. And once I broke the channel of having a job, while finances did matter and it did give me a pinch from time to time, I realized that I was so much more in control of my time and so much more in control of how I spend time with my family and how I interact with them, and realize that we tend to make safety nets on top of safety nets as far as finances are concerned, and leaning a little bit on your safety net while you're reconnecting and refreshing yourself is actually not a bad idea. And while enough people do this creates a demand in the job market, and that's what's feeding this entire phenomenon. That's my 2 cents on this. It's not the only reason.
If you had, I know several young people who've purchased houses, right?
Right.
So they have a EMI to pay.
Poor sorts.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure they aren't going to be quiet quitting anything, because you need that regularity, you need that cash flow, right?
No, I think those guys will be quiet quitting. Quiet quitting is basically you're staying in the job while doing the bare minimum.
No, but that is inviting firing, right? So if I was their boss,
not necessarily.
I don't know.
Depends on whether you.
Yeah. Are you not asking for it? I mean, I'm looking from an employer. I'm an old school employer, and I have no clue how the world functions outside my little manufacturing enterprise. But if I sense that somebody is not pulling his weight, he goes out.
No,
actually,
I think
I would like Tony to answer that question.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Tony, what do you think? Because I mean, as a person who is pretty much amongst us the only one who's employed with like an employer in some way.
Oh shit, this is true. Right.
Yeah. So I'm curious
Like-
to know your point of view on it. Yeah.
Yeah, weird things have happened during the pandemic, right? So, like, obviously, I left my previous job and joined a new one mid-pandemic with the same larger group, as it were. But obviously, a different work culture, and I didn't see my team for a good 1.5 years, right? But then, like, later when we met up and, sort of spent time together, I would say for like a couple of weeks long workshop, the entire sort of like way in which people were willing to contribute to the cause changed a lot, right? And drastically, right? So this is also one of the first times that I am sort of in a boss kind of position, have to actually look at, really young people starting out, freshers, all of that, right? So, and look at, what they're able to do, how much and how important it is. Communication is also extremely important, right? Sometimes you don't realize how much a person actually contributes till you meet them physically and spend time with them, which is gone missing. So a lot of contextual cues have gone missing once you've done remote work, right? But at the same time, I think like it becomes much easier to sort of impart that meaning, or like, provide some leadership, as it were. I'm doing lots of air quotes, which you guys can't see. When you meet people face to face, and like everyone at the end of the day is looking for a direction, right? So you either take direction from people you spent a lot of time with, which used to be in office, and then there would be certain characters at work who you're like, oh, maybe in 5 years I want to be like this person, or 10 years I want to be like this person. All of that has gone out the window. Now all of your sort of cues come from what is there on TikTok or Instagram, etc., etc. So I realistically think that while people might leave for a much better job in that sense, this phenomenon, I would say, is temporary if like physical workplaces come back into being, because at the end of the day, you are in a place where Mark Zuckerberg has said we're not going to hire anymore. Google is also going in that direction, and that sort of quick wave of like tech salaries doubling and tripling is going out the window, right? And it will sort of normalize back to where you were in a different sort of normal, but I think it will go back to pretty much
I think it's also important to see not paint all industries with kind of like the same brush, like Tony very rightly said. The tech companies, be it the big tech companies or the ITS firms, I'm pretty sure like they're doing decently with respect to talent and all that. The report that you were talking about, I'm guessing that this might be the report, but look at the very specific kind of jobs that, for which there are vacancies right now. Germany has a shortage of plumbers. The US needs more postal workers. Australia is lacking engineers. In Canada, hospitals are looking for more
healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers. And what is not mentioned over here is that the UK is missing prime ministers. But we will not talk about that right now. So it's not like the Great Resignation or whatever its subsequent version is affecting every kind of worker around the
So which
world,
is what
right?
and actually bringing it back to that point, and Tony, what you were saying also, and I just wanted to focus on the quiet quitting part of things, because I think it is the quiet quitting is a reaction to the current market situation. As you have said, that now the companies are not like in a mad scramble to hire. In fact, a lot of people are kind of like restricting themselves, a lot of restricting their hiring and all that stuff. So, which is where I kind of see this quiet quitting as a reaction to that, because the underlying tension has not gone anywhere. Your need for job security has gone up, but the underlying tension remains. And which is where it seems like this quiet quitting is a... So I just wanted to get your perspective that do you see this phenomenon also in the organization, in your organization?
Yeah, I mean, across the board, right? I think one true thing is that your boss does not determine your hike or salary or anything. There will be an HR realm in place, right? So what does a boss do? If you do good work, you will be given more work, pretty much, right? So beyond a point, for an employee who is doing really well and he is not being compensated adequately in her or his sort of or their frame of things, they'd be like, why do I do all this extra work if I'm just going to get more work and nothing beyond that, right? So like the HR problems don't go away anywhere. At the same time, you hear all of this media things saying, people are getting double, triple salaries, and it probably doesn't work for you. So the logical thing to do, therefore, is I sort of recalibrate how much I work for the amount that I'm making. But the
as they
sad
would
part
say,
is if you do good,
act your wage.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So,
Yeah.
I mean, just to put like one more thing is to say, from when I was 21 to when I'm 35, the only difference that I see is that actually, like, when you are a fresher and you don't think that work defines you, which is great, you should be in that role. But like over a period of time, anything that I've tried, it is the fact that the work is its own reward, right? Like as much as we joke about Simblified, we make the effort to be here. We don't get anything else out of it except the fact that we are doing something, right? Or
Precisely.
if you were writing a newsletter over the weekend, we committed to doing it, and basically the work was its own reward, right? So the unfortunate, sad truth, going back to man's search for meaning, is that the only way to sort of get meaning out of work is to sort of put in the yards, right? And it's not going to be a monetary benefit. It is that you have done a hard thing which you thought you couldn't do, and you've come out of it, and that sort of gives you a feeling that.
Well said. That's a very good point.
That's a beautiful point. And that's precisely where I think that beautifully ties in with that quiet quitting aspect, which is something we also discussed a little earlier, was that meaning, that reward that you're getting, the meaningful reward that you're getting is the now recalibrated for all these quiet quitters to happen beyond the 9 to 5 hours. Right. Yeah. You're doing activities where you're either hanging out with your friends, spending more time with your family, like doing more acts of service for your family or your friends, or getting together on a project outside of work and kind of contributing to it. That is where you're receiving and kind of like recalibrated yourself to get that reward. And you're like, this is what I do to earn my money. And then I do my life outside of it. Right. Yeah. So that's where these quiet quitters are coming from. And that's where, I mean, there was this, and I think I liked how we kind of moved into the conversation. I was actually planning to go through the list of reasons, but I think we've touched on everything. I just want to touch on certain points that we kind of talked about. One important aspect that a lot of, so some of the key reasons that were expressed by a lot of the quiet quitters, so to speak, was that the entire concept of working beyond capacity. Now, in the advertising agency realm, there was a very classic thing, I mean, that used to be said a lot in the organization, is that you are always 150% committed, right? Your time is always 150% committed. And then if you're going to 200% committed, you're getting to overwork, but 150 is minimum, right? And that, I think there is a major rejection of that entire concept. Like everybody would like ruefully smile and get on with their life on that. And I think there is a real rejection of that particular concept of saying that, you know what, I am not willing to, why should I'm not getting 150% salary. I am not getting 150% benefit. Then why should I go 150% beyond capacity, right? The other aspect, which was, and the more interesting, so I mean, we covered a lot of the smaller stuff that was there, but I think some of the more interesting ones was that a lot of actually individuals are not resonating with their company's vision or ideals. Right. There was also an expression of that, which I found really interesting, because like, I mean, especially when you work in advertising and all that stuff, like beyond a point, you get very cynical about these things. You're like, who cares what the company's vision is? Yeah, I have a job, I do my job. Right. But now I think there is a lot more realization and a lot more awareness and desire also that I want to be working towards a cause that matters. And I want to be working towards something that it does not need to be mattering to like I don't want to work for an NGO, but I want to work towards something that actually builds something.
Yeah,
right?
If
or
not
does something.
That, yeah, or if not that, at least not work for a company that I know or my peer group knows. Like it might be taboo to work for certain companies or certain sectors.
Precisely.
Or,
so I had an anecdote of this, and I'm not going to state specific names, but you guys will understand where it's at. At my previous organization, at one point of time, the real big boss got a divorce. Right, the big internationally big boss got a divorce, and there was an article about how much his ex-wife was spending on. She bought a pet hotel for her dog only, and a bunch of dog groomers and all that stuff. Right, and at one point I was working at like 1 a.m. or something, doing some like writing some insane deck or something like that, and I was like, I am basically working so that in the alimony that my boss's founder is paying, it goes on the maintenance. So my salary is basically getting paid, like my work value is basically getting contributed in keeping that dog, his ex-wife's dog, groomed. Right. So that realization hit me, and there was a sense of melancholy. But I think now what a lot of people are doing is that sense of melancholy, and when that realization hits is when they are actually getting into the phase of either quitting outright or quiet quitting.
Yeah. We take a break right here, and we will be back.
All right, sit down, all of you. Break's over.
By the way, guess who has got into the game of clickbait headlines? The World Economic Forum. Yes, exactly.
Of
What
course.
you had.
I've seen
So
this. Yeah.
this is a headline. Okay, this is the headline. This country has the highest number of people planning to quit their jobs. And I'm just going to read you the four. I mean, it's just everything that we've spoken about, but it's summed up nicely in 4 bullet points. 2/5 of people are unhappy at work and are considering leaving their job in the near future, according to a new survey by McKinsey. That's global. In India, said country, that figure jumps to more than 60%. Lack of career development and inadequate pay, etc., etc. This comes as official statistics show that there are a high number of unfilled job positions across many of the world's biggest economies. It's fascinating to me that to more than 60, it's almost 70%, 66% of Indians are apparently planning to quit their jobs. It's fascinating to me because that to me is a seismic shift in this country that has often prized job stability and being married to a certain job and all that. All that. To me, that is fascinating that a lot of Indians it's not going to be culturally taboo to leave job. I mean, my parents used to ask me, why are you hopping companies in 2 years?
Actually, I personally take that as a good sign because here's what happens. Okay, so I know a large tech company abroad in the US. Okay, this is what is happening. So I know young people who are working for this company. Let us say those young people were hired at 100 rupees and they worked for a couple of years. They got a promotion and they got 140 or 150 rupees depending on. So very happy. But a lot of them are also unhappy for non-financial reasons because their manager is basically not doing a good job. They're not, focused. So
they're not getting avocado toast in the canteen.
Yeah, and the way the company was organized was that, and it still is as far as I know, is the manager has to report 10% of his or her employees for firing every year.
Yeah. The Jack Welch method, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
So, these are some called involuntary attrition. Something they have some fancy word for that. And now what happened is, over a period of time, so everything was hunky-dory and then people were shy, but they found jobs elsewhere because US tech market was really booming and other people were very happy to receive, people who have worked in a large tech organization. Now, because they had to have bodies on the job, they are forced to hire new people at 200 rupees. And for the job which they were paying 100 rupees.
Exactly.
And those guys who used to earn 100 have been promoted at one. They are pissed as hell. Yeah. So now those guys are quitting because the new monkeys are getting 200 rupees and the old monkeys are getting only 150. So now they have to hire more new monkeys at 200 rupees. That company is very, very large and it doesn't look like it'll ever bomb. But this is really skating on thin ice. I would be very, very worried if I was the CEO of this company. And so it's a lot of really stupid managerial policies which are active demotivators. So
and there was one point that you said, Naren, on the manager's aspect, and there was this data point also that said something about that, which said one of the key reasons why people were quiet quitting as well is because the least effective manager. So this was from a HBR article where of Zenger Folkman Consultancy, which said that the least effective managers have 3 to 4 times as many people who fall in the quiet quitting category compared to the most effective leaders. And this is something that was also something that I was discussing with another friend at one point of time, where we tend to think that we work for an organization in a lot of cases, but in a lot of cases, we end up working for a particular manager in a particular team or on a particular account or for a particular client or whatever that may be. So the experience of people within the same organization who may just be sitting next to each other, the experience of that organization may wildly vary because of these immediate terms, right? So while I might be working for a very prestigious organization, my immediate manager is not treating me well or is screwing me over. And that is what's causing my entire experience to go to hell. And while I may be in an organization that generally is trying to reward me, because of the experience with my manager is why I'm reverting to quiet quitting, right? So it's not just an organizational policy thing. It may just be an immediate manager thing also in many cases.
Correct.
Yeah, age-old saying that people don't leave their jobs, they leave their bosses, right? So
precisely, yeah.
But I think to Chuck's point about like in India it being 66%, I think one point that we need to emphasize is that on average, the work culture in India is terrible, right?
Yeah.
That it is very different from like what you can expect in any developed or forward country in that sense, right? So there are absolutely, thankfully, I mean, I've never had to face that because of a certain organization I belong to, but there are absolutely no boundaries as to, you know, weekdays or weekends or hours or like, you know, there's no space like WhatsApp, which is supposed to be a personal chat, also taking over like work related stuff and all of that, right? So the lack of boundaries and the work culture in India in general has been like really oppressive, right? So it is not surprising that we have like 66% people who want to quit.
But it is changing. I see it changing in tech. I know a lot of young people who are getting 2x and 3x of their salaries just because they, you know, so there's one young person, I'm extrapolating, generalities from very small, but he was, this young person was actively hounded by his boss for very silly reason. Apparently there was a girl in the office that, you know, the boss thought that this guy had a, thing with or something like that. It's completely unrelated to the work. And so he starts harassing him. So this guy, he says, hell with it. And he puts in his papers. He starts getting calls from the boss's boss, asking him in very plain language, what will it take for you to stay on? He says, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't know what. So the boss's boss doubles his salary straight away.
Yeah.
And so here's what is happening. There is a lot of work all of a sudden in that particular industry for whatever reason. So you have pockets like this, and I think that will force companies to start improving their work culture, because you can't keep offering a 2x to everyone, and 2x is not solving the problem. It's not really solving the problem.
Yeah.
Because 2 months later, he's going to say, even 2x is not worth it. Hell with it. I don't want to work.
It's interesting, Naren, what you said, because there are a couple of reasons for that. And we could honestly do a complete episode on just that. It's because during the pandemic, a lot of these tech startups, they raised a lot of capital. They have to put MVPs in place. And so they're willing to do whatever it takes, right, to get it out there. And I'm not quite sure whether that's the same situation right now. But I don't think the 2x, 3x thing is going to happen anymore.
The situation also, I think the situation also kind of beyond just wage, I think the situation extends to, I mean, it fundamentally comes down to culture also. Like when you're talking about culture, and like Tony said that with the organization that he's at, there is a certain work culture that's established, which is more on par with like the international standards of working in some ways. And that particular work culture,
they are the guys who brought the concept of weekends to India. So
yeah, exactly. And that particular concept is, in fact, I mean, I'd say the percolation is slow. In fact, I've in the past year, not naming any names, been working with some pretty big organizational names in India, and the work culture, even though they have corporate like policies about like say having mental health days and having all these different things, those are routinely ignored and like walked past, and this is not how we do things in India kind of culture that's happening. And I think that is the reflection of that statistic that you're trying to say, because like at the end of the day, it comes from a reality that people are experiencing, but everyone's like, okay, these are all luxuries that we can't afford. Let's just get to work right now, which I think over a period of time is getting slowly rejected. And also, I mean, I know. Sorry, go on, Tony. Yeah.
No, the best example of how it's like rapidly changed was, I think, last week or the week before that, there was this LinkedIn post by Shantanu Deshpande of Bombay Shaving Company, right? Where he was basically saying, if you're young, you have to put in 18 hours of work. All this like resting and all you can do later.
Yeah.
Except like everyone pretty much bashed him left, right, and center. Right? To the point that he quit LinkedIn and rejoined LinkedIn and then quit again or something like that. But basically, like, this was the sort of hustle culture that was being promoted, right? An extremely toxic one where you are told that literally, like, you study engineering, then you can do what you want type. So first 6 years of work, you put in like 18 hours. After that, you'll be rewarded. So that, I think, It's a good thing to reject.
Yeah, I think there is an overlap between, so while it's not a one-to-one where that's a one-to-one rejection, but in some ways I feel there is a part of an overlap from what is woke culture generally and the percolation of woke culture, being woke about not just social issues, but being woke about like mental health, being woke about work-life balance, being woke about all of these aspects. And the narrative has shifted where now, like, for example, this dude, I can totally imagine this dude posting this maybe say even 5-6 years ago would have been like maybe celebrated. Yeah, but his overall prevailing, I mean, the prevailing narrative has changed to an extent where it's flipped to the extent where now someone who would have been celebrated for a very frank and overt post. And this is, I mean, what he said is actually to some extent advice I have given some interns as well. When I was like 3-4-5 years ago, saying that, boss, for the first couple of years, घिसाना पड़ता है. ठीक है, उसके बाद कुछ होता है. Is I have given that advice, and now, I mean, I would be wary of giving that advice anywhere because I'll be like, yeah, everyone has their own truth and everyone has their own reality, which is because of this prevailing woke, everyone's journey towards being more woke. And that's kind of like, and I think wokeness is in opposition to the hustle culture attitude of things.
Yeah,
right? So,
I think what's fueling this is also the fact that there's a lot of transparency with respect to actual money, salaries, and all that out there. By the way, we keep talking about a perfect storm over here, and all of us are recording in Bombay right now, and there is actually a perfect storm happening outside. They want to say, because I can see lightning over here, and then immediately I can see it happen in Srikeit's room as well. So it's quite interesting.
It's fully dark out here, yeah.
So like there are people who are asking logical questions like, hey, if you actually, like, I think Srikeit, we had this discussion once, right, where you were being offered X amount of money, and then you rejected it, and then immediately the person said, okay, I'm going to pay you 1.5x more. And the point being, listen, if you could do that, then why not have done that in the first place? Or like, or when where employees discover salary disparity between genders and things like that. It's obviously more a global phenomenon, but as more and more of this information, it's less taboo now to talk about how much you're earning and all those kind of things out there. And I think all that kind of just fuels into the fact that, okay, employees are one thing and the rich folks at the top in the corner offices are another thing. And there's always that sort of battle between the two. I guess great culture is just when, these two can talk to each other in like humans.
And I'm glad you brought up that example, because also that sparked a thought in some way where, the another reason for why this 2x and 2.5x and 3x culture is kind of like, 3x like work pays coming up is because, the incremental increase wala idea, especially because when the entire concept of why do you go with a 2x kind of offer? Because there's a shock and awe associated with it, right? I'm doubling your salary straight up. What that tends to do is it tends to mask why a particular employee is being offered that. Like you have a lot of fundamental problems with the organization, from your manager to the work culture to how they're treating you to the being overworked to your mental health, all of those aspects that are there underlying. And that 2x is kind of masking that and kind of buying a little time with that employee. And what is therefore also happening, and because you brought up that example, when that person went from like 1 to 1.5x, when that offer came to me, and I was like, no, I'm not rejecting it because of the money, and offering me more money at this point of time is not really what I'm looking at. And there are a lot more people who are actually taking that. Whereas like if 3 years ago, someone was giving me an offer and someone just added 1 lakh to that offer, I'd take that. Okay, this is a better financial offer, so let me go here. That would be the simple linear thinking you're doing. At this point, there are more deeper decisions happening because I feel that this entire ethos has kind of sunk deeper into our consciousness and affecting our decisions now. It's not just something cognitive.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that it might, like when such a huge offer is made, I think employees across the board and age levels are just getting smarter and thinking there has to be a catch over here. If my salary is being doubled overnight, it just means that the amount of work that I'm going to do is going to be 4x what it is right now. This might be one way of thinking.
Which was also something I was thinking about, because I was like, if I'm going to say that, okay, this is the offer and it's already an outrageous offer, and then you're going above that outrageous offer, I'm like, there is a fish here I can't smell and that's going to sit in my pants for the rest of 2 years now. So I have to get the hell out of here right now. But so sorry, one more point that I wanted to make. Among the different reasons for quiet quitting, and this is actually very relevant, and it's a point that I really feel we should bring up in this sausage fest of a podcast, is that how quiet quitting has affected like not just the other gender, not just women, but also like other minorities, right? And I mean, this is not a phenomenon that is new, but there has been an issue with like women as well as minorities in other countries. Like the data that is there is in other countries as far as like black people are concerned in the United States and all that stuff, that you have to work twice as hard to go half as far, right? So that entire concept of like how I think these aspects of how women are being treated, how men and women are being treated differentially, how men and women are being paid differentially, how they are being evaluated. Like, for example, one study found that both men and women in the tech industry, women were more likely to get negative feedback because of personality traits that were seen as positive in men. Right? Like women are abrasive while men are assertive. Women are frequently noted to be bossy while men are like being more assertive in some way, or they are being more strident, emotional, irrational. All of these things are, and while men are aggressive, and these are positive qualities that are looked at in that way. And I think these aspects have now actually come into the fray where the female candidates are all like, you know what? I know, and like you, and also the point that you brought up, Chuck, about the whole transparency in salaries now, what people are making. I know what this other person is making. I know this other person who is doing less work than I am is making far more than I am. And also I am being treated in this negative way where despite contributing double as much work, I'm only getting half as far. So a large part of the female, and we're seeing this in India data also. Like, I mean, I'm saying across sectors, that female labor participation, and I'm saying across sectors, even blue collars, that female labor participation is at an all-time low at this point. So this is actually really affecting minorities. And as far as, I mean, this is also true of in the US of black people, how they are getting affected by it. But I would more want to talk about the women aspect of things here.
Yeah, I think Amit Verma had a long podcast on the labor participation in the workforce, and you would think that the Great Resignation, or not Great Resignation, sorry, the whole remote working phenomenon might actually be a boost, but in some ways, it just shows how many different strands there are that can actually turn the direction the other way, right?
Yeah. And that's what it's like. There's this really good statement of like, I mean, just to kind of sum things up overall, where someone was talking about, so there was an article on MSNBC that was talking about how quiet quitting is about making a loud statement. And the way they said, it's not about apathy. It is a peaceful protest, a demand for opportunity, equality, and appreciation. And when I read that word, it almost felt like, it's effectively a satyagraha, right? Yeah. It's a non-cooperation movement, right? I'm going to be here. I'm not going to it's non-cooperation. It's not saying I will not interact with you or whatever. I'm just not going to cooperate with what your lofty expectations of what I'm supposed to do. I'm just going to do the bare minimum, and I'm going to protest through my actions, right? Yeah. And so that seemed like a very positive thing. And that's what it also said, that for leaders to react meaningfully to this sweeping trend, they need to do more than just accept that workers are asking for demanding for a fair and mutually beneficial exchange. They need to use it as a springboard to connect inequities in fair treatment that have lasted for decades, right?
It's all good in theory.
No. The right line to say is that ये सब ठीक है पर इंडिया में नहीं चलेगा.
I'm reminded of this would be so awesome if it was like we have trapeze artists and one of them decides to quiet quit, then just in the middle of the swing.
No, I was saying, what about a laborer who's using a jackhammer? How does he quiet quit?
Yeah, but I don't think it's an India only phenomena, right? It's just that earlier, now you just have more access to more things, right? Yeah. Like that can take up your time. Right? You don't necessarily need to go all the way to a football game to do something other than work, right? Like famously, Google had everything, including a kitchen, laundry, all of that in their offices, just to keep employees there 24/7, right? Including like places to sleep and all of that, right? But now a lot more, options are available for you, and it is much harder, like we said, for someone to drink the organizational Kool-Aid, especially if they're not sort of, contextually, culturally co-located. It's like, I think it's a very tough solve, to be honest.
Yeah. I don't envy HR managers over the next decade.
Actually, there's a terrific book called The Network State, written by Balaji Srinivasan, which I started reading, and then life gets in the way and you can't do all these wonderful things. But I plan to
your other networks got in the way.
Yeah, other networks. So basically, he's talking about how you can actually start a country by, so just people getting together and everything is decentralized. So all that is of course fine, but when you read all that, you realize we are at a state where there are things called decentralized, what are that? Autonomous DAOs, right?
DAOs, decentralized autonomous organization on blockchain.
Yeah. So those kind of things are speedily becoming a reality. So the reason they haven't become a reality yet is no one knows exactly how to manage these things. Organize people into productive units. But if you could, then the day of the large organization might be over. So reason you have a lot of large tech companies, especially in IT services, is because it's a large organization. Someone at the top has the power to enforce his or her employees to deliver. So you promise your customer you're going to deliver something which is really large, and then you get your employees to deliver it. That's how they do it. And if smaller decentralized organizations are able to do it far more efficiently, we might be able to see, because there people can get in and out of organizations pretty easily. Yeah, and the organization as a whole is responsible, and whatever goes on within the organization is very collaborative. There's no seniority, juniority. There are people who know exactly what is happening, and then they divvy up the spoils according to what they own in the organization, which is also transparent.
So actually, Naren, from what you're saying, right, it takes me back to the Freakonomics, like the opening anecdotes in Freakonomics, which talk about like how the entirety of human history has, or all kinds of value that has been created is because of a certain level of information asymmetry, right?
Correct.
Like I have information which you don't have, and I'm going to charge you for that information. But the moment that information asymmetry is removed, that particular industry itself can almost collapse, or you have to determine how that industry will work in a different way. So what, like an example that's used in Freakonomics is they talked about how the insurance industry had to like almost universally slash their premiums in half the moment the internet came around, right? Because people could actually compare insurance premiums with each other, and that's what caused it. And similarly, now you're looking at organizations, there is so much more transparency about roles, what other organizations are doing, wages. You're able to compare so much more with, and experiences, like how is the job experience actually supposed to be. And now with the advent of DAOs, like literally blockchain is capturing every level of data that is open for anyone to examine. So whatever anybody does on a DAO is like open to anybody. There is no confidentiality in any which way of anything. And when you have that level of transparency, it automatically has to result in people wanting to have equity in that way, right? If I'm doing the same amount of work, I need to get the same amount of remuneration, reward, benefit, credit, whatever that may be. And so I think what we are seeing is a great resignation phenomenon, as well as this thing is a manifestation of that loss of a lot of information asymmetry, which is now causing a lot of disillusionment among employees.
As a great philosopher once said, all good in theory.
All good in theory.
But also an example of a successful DAO is Simblified.
You got it back. Okay. Wow. To commemorate the Great Resignation, I thought I'd ask you guys some trivia questions. So I hope you're ready.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the difference
Let
between...
me take my glasses off so I can facepalm more easily.
Yeah. Okay. What's the difference? What's the difference between all these people quitting, say environmentalists just giving up? One is the Great Resignation and the other is Greta Resignation. It's very bad. It's a very bad start. It's a very bad start. So
nice.
I told my Raddiwala I didn't need him anymore because I handed him my papers. Okay. What's the difference between getting fired and the brain drain? One is a pink slip and the other is a think slip. It's a slightly deep one. It's a slightly deep one.
This is like Albert Einstein level. Yeah, Albert Einstein and Kurt Gödel would crack these ones to each other.
Fair enough. It looks like Michelin's mascot is not going to be around anymore. He retired. You see how all this is based on a theme. Okay, what's the best thing and the worst thing that can happen to you if you hit on your boss? He can either notice you or give you notice.
I thought he could either give you a hike or ask you to take a hike.
Or you can also make one. Yeah, you can also make one with laid off, but it's best not to go there. What is the difference between never working again for the parent company of Alfa Romeo and just giving up in life? One is you have resigned from your fiat, and the other is you have resigned to your fate. And finally, if you take Chuck, Srikeit, Tony, and Naren and rearrange the letters, you get Chunky Trick to resign. Of course, the resign will.
Wow.
The only problem is the resign will have to be spelled RESINE,
yeah.
but we'll give us a little bit of creative.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that is simplified for this, and I wouldn't blame any.
I think we cannot top that anymore. I think that is, we have reached the natural conclusion of this podcast. So only thing left is Naren. Please see us out.
No, there are two things left. One, if you're listening to this, please don't greatly resign in terms of listenership from this show. We still love you. So yes, now Naren, please sign us
Stay
off.
safe, stay resigned to your fate, and stay simplified.
I thought you would go with stay employed, but okay. I like
Stay
that.
employed.
Apologies for the lightning, everybody, and hopefully the next episode we do is good. And we are not even in Bangalore. Hopefully we'll be over water.
I think that's about it. See you guys. Bye bye.
Okay, that was fun.